Hello everyone and welcome to my Lycaon guide. Lycaon is a crazy unit right now. He is completely broken, and in this video I'm gonna go over how to make him broken. I'm gonna go over how to play him, how to build him, what teams to put him in, and all sorts of other important things you need to know. So with that said, let's first kick things off with what Lycaon's role is in his teams. Lycaon's role is to stun enemies. Just as any other stun character, his purpose in teams is to build up days on enemies so they take increased damage. And best of all, when he causes enemies to become stunned, which is very easy to do, the enemies will actually take an increased amount of days damage. Rather than just taking 150%, they'll actually take 185%. And this is completely broken. Lycaon just completely destroys enemies. It's crazy, but let's now get into how you actually want to inflict days on enemies. The primary way that you want to inflict days with Lycaon is first going to be his normal attacks. When you play him, you want to be constantly using them, but the important thing to remember is that when you use him, you don't want to be tapping his normal attack button. This is because, for one, when you use his tap normal attacks, they won't be dealing a lot of damage. They're going to be physical damage, or they're going to be weak, and second off, they don't apply that much days to enemies. Instead, what you want to do is that you actually want to hold his normal attacks. When you do so, you'll notice that Lycaon has a new attack string, and these attacks deal a whole lot more damage since they're ice attacks, and best of all, they deal a whole lot more days to enemies. The next way that you're going to be building days on enemies is with this EX special attack. Once you've built enough energy on Lycaon, you want to use his special attack, but like his normal attacks, remember that you don't want to tap it. Instead, you want to hold his special attack, since holding it will deal more damage and will deal more days to enemies. As if there wasn't any more reason to use his EX special attack, when you use his EX special attack, the enemies that he attacks will have their ice resistance decreased 25%, which is huge, and then for 30 seconds. So not only will Lycaon himself be dealing a whole lot more damage, any other ice unit in your team will likewise be dealing a whole lot more damage for a long time. Last and certainly not least comes Lycaon's ultimate. When you use his ultimate, he deals a massive amount of ice damage to enemies, and the days he also applies to enemies is also huge. It is far higher than any other of his moves, so if Lycaon is the DPS in your team, which is a very viable role for him, be sure to use this ability whenever you can. Now, with all this in mind, when you're leveling up his abilities, be sure to first prioritize his basic attacks and then his special attack. If you're building him as a DPS, then certainly as well prioritize his ultimate. For his assist and dodge attack, to be quite honest, you can ignore them since for the most part they aren't that important and you're not really going to be using his dodge attack, but you can level them up if you'd like. And of course, be sure to level his core skill as much as possible, since doing so will increase the days he deals to enemies. So now that you know how to play Lycaon, let's talk about what are the best W engines to use on him. So when it comes to Lycaon's W engines, the thing about them is that he can actually use all of them. However, some are better than the others. The first best one is of course going to be his signature, that being the Restraint. First off, this engine gives him impact, which is a very good stat to have when it comes to stun characters. The more impact a character has, the faster they'll be able to inflict days on enemies, so this is a very good thing. And then on top of all this, the passive of the engine increases the basic damage of Lycaon as well as the days it applies to enemies. So overall, this engine is amazing for Lycaon. Next to the Restraint comes the Hellfire Gears. With this engine, instead of focusing on basic attacks, it focuses on EX special attacks. So when the wearer goes off field, their energy will be increased by a good amount, meaning that when they come back on field, they'll be able to perform their EX special attack a whole lot more often, which is very nice. And then when they actually perform the special attack of theirs, the impact dealt to the enemies will be higher. While EX special attacks are good, and Lycaon's is very good, it's definitely not as important as his basic attacks. So while it does lose to the Restraint, it still is a very good engine to use on Lycaon. Next comes the A-rank W engines, and from this you really only have three options. First is the Precious Fossilized Core, which is actually a free-to-play weapon, then the Steam Oven, which comes from Wishing or Gacha, and then finally is the 6-shooter, which is a Battle Pass weapon. The best of these three is the 6-shooter. It gives you impact, and its passive works that the longer you use Lycaon, the more days he will inflict on enemies, and this is a really good thing, but the only problem is that this is from the Battle Pass, and to be quite honest, with the Precious Fossilized Core, there's not much reason to get this 6-shooter. The Precious Fossilized Core is really good. It gives you impact, and while its passive isn't that good since it is restricted to the enemy's HP bar, it still gives you days, so it's still nonetheless a very solid W engine to give Lycaon. Then comes the Steam Oven. Just as the Hellfire gear, it gives energy, which again is a good stat to have, but energy does fall short in comparison to impact. Because of this, while the Oven is without a doubt useful, I'd recommend to give Lycaon engines that give off more impact, such as the Fossilized Core. Now, aside from these 3 W engines, you can use Anby's W engine, which you do get just by progressing through the game, but while it gives impact, the problem with the engine is that it increases the user's electric damage, and of course Lycaon is ice, so he has no use for this passive, and it's ultimately just a waste. For those just starting out the game and looking for a weapon, you can use the Vortex Arrow on Lycaon until you get one of the better weapons I've mentioned. Now let's delve into what drive discs you want to use on Lycaon. Right off the bat, 4 Shockstar Disco is going to be the best option. It gives him impact and increases the daze caused by his basic attacks, which cater to his kit and playstyle perfectly. For those like me playing him as a DPS, you might be focusing on increasing his personal damage and as such focusing on 4 Polar Metal or say 4 Hormone Punk, but in truth you should still go for 4 Shockstar. The reason why is that even with Shockstar, you'll still be dealing high personal damage, since with this set, enemies will be stunned more often, meaning that Lycaon's damage will be more frequently increased by 185%. So really with this set, you get the best of both worlds, high stun and likewise high damage. Plus with this set, you will future-proof your Lycaon. If say you get Ellen or another really good DPS and now you just use Lycaon for stunning, you don't need to reform his discs. Instead, he can just use what he already has. So with 4 Shockstar equipped, you can fill the 2 remaining disc slots with either 2 Polar Metal for ice damage, 2 Punk for attack, or 2 Woodpecker for some extra crit rate. My advice is to go with Polar Metal since you can get crit rate from substats and ice damage will in most cases lead to higher damage than attack. Plus you can get attack from teammates, which I'll get into the team section. 2 Swing Jazz is another good option since it can give a good boost to his energy. With that, be sure to have the main stats of crit rate or crit damage if you can maintain good enough crit rate with substats. If you're struggling with these 2, attack percentage can be feasible. Next up, ice damage, and finally, impact percentage. While grinding for these discs, aim for the substats of both crits, attack percentage, and then pen ratio. Let's talk about some great team compositions to play Lycaon in. I'll go over 2 premium teams, and the first one is basically the best team right now, with Lycaon, Sukaku, and Ellen. This team is so good it's crazy. Everyone here is very strong, and they all complement each other really well. Here Sukaku is gonna give a very nice attack buff to Ellen, in addition to increasing her and Lycaon's ice damage. In this team, Lycaon will be played as a stun unit, causing enemies to be dazed, while also decreasing their ice res by 25%. When dazed, Lycaon is switched off, and then finally comes the beast that is Ellen, using all these buffs to simply tear through enemies. She's already incredible as a DPS, but in this team, she becomes even better and just rips through anyone in her way while hitting for some really exceptional numbers. For Bang Boos, you can equip the Butler for some better energy uptime, or the Penguin Boo for some better ice application, so you can perform Freeze, Shatter, and Frostbite more often. The next team focuses on Lycaon as a DPS. Again, we'll be using Sukaku since she's so good in ice teams, but we'll also be using Rina. This is to meet the conditions of Lycaon's additional ability, but also to make use of Rina's team-wide pen ratio buff, which allows for Lycaon's attacks to ignore a portion of the enemy's defense. All these things can make Lycaon fit seamlessly into the role of DPS, tearing through enemies and defeating them very quickly. This is even the case for strong bosses. I've used this team extensively, and in the cases where all the buffs are active, Lycaon can defeat a boss in mere seconds. Just as the last team, you can use Penguin Boo and the Butler. Now for some free-to-play team setups, a really nice one is with Sukaku and Nicole. Here Lycaon will once more be a DPS, and this time around playing him will feel a lot better since Nicole is in this team. Nicole is very strong when it comes to crowd control, since with her special attack and chain attacks, she'll group enemies close together, allowing for Lycaon to attack all of them at once. She'll also decrease the defense of enemies by a considerable amount, so Lycaon will further be buffed. This team is best when fighting mobs of enemies, but thanks to Nicole's defense shred, it's still effective against bosses. For a team centered around Lycon as a stun unit, to be honest, there are many. Really, for pretty much any team, you can just slot him in and he'll perform the stun role really well, but an example of such a team is with Corrin and Lucy. Here we take all the pros of Lucy and Lycon and apply them to Corrin, turning her into a very effective damage dealer. By pairing Corrin and Lycan together, not only will Corrin make use of the 185% increased stun damage, but her additional ability will be unlocked, which further increases her damage to stun units by a huge 35%. So the pairing of these two is really nice, but then with Lucy you get a good passive damage dealer through the boars, as well as an attack buff that increases both Lycon's and Corrin's attack. Aside from Lucy, Nicole is another great candidate as a support, since Corrin can really use the pairing that Nicole gives out. Well everyone, this is my guide to Lycon. If you have any questions about him, be sure to ask me them in the comments, and to your right is a video on some exceptional A rank characters that every account should have built. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and thanks for watching.